All right, welcome to this week's Journal Club. I am Mike. I will be the presenter for today. I'm from Suchia Lab, a PhD student myself. Lipeng.
Hello guys, from the same lab. I'm a research assistant in the same lab. Chuyin.
Yeah, my name is Chuyin, and I'm a PhD student from the same lab. Yeah, Anson.
And I am a research intern at the same lab as well, hoping to start PhD later. Yes.
All right. Today we are going to talk about the somewhat controversial adversarial collaboration between the global neural workspace theory and the integrated information theory. I will be reading the study protocol paper rather than the result paper itself. Now let's begin. So what are these two series and why do we want to test them? Well, you see, so far, there have been a proliferation of different conscious series. And they seems to be all going their own ways and very rarely interact with each other. So in this case, they thought it would be a good idea if we pit two major series of consciousness head to head against each other in this collaboratory experiment to examine what evidence actually favors each of these series. So let's introduce our two candidates. The first one is the Global Neural Workspace Theory, GNWT. What is the Global Workspace Theory? Well, it believes that in our prefrontal cortex, the structure of the neurons and the connection to the rest of the brain allow something called the global workspace to emerge, I suppose. Since this area is so connected with the rest of the brain, including all the higher level sensory area, so on and so forth. Well, specifically, actually, it's a reciprocal connection, yes. So that when all the informations we're receiving, processing all the informations, some of them can go through a process called ignition, where they overcome a threshold and being broadcast, well, they enter the global workspace and then being broadcast across the entire brain. And these information are considered to be conscious when they enter the workspace. In fact, the entire human consciousness, according to the GNWT, is entirely sustained by this workspace itself. Now, what about the other candidate, IIT, Integrated Information Theory? Well, it's difficult to explain the entirety of IIT in a short period of time, but the idea seems to be that based on just not simple introspection, just based on introspection about our experience, they were able to came up with 5 fundamental axioms that describes all our experience. And through these 5 axioms, they were able to develop 5 different postulates, mathematical methods that allows us to investigate the integrated information about any physical system, maybe brain, maybe computer, and you will be able to construct a cause-effect structure just by looking at this physical structure. And they proposed that this cause-effect structure is consciousness. It describes both the level and the content of consciousness just through its structure and the property of these structures. Now that's IIT. That seems to be two very different theory, right? What are some of the exact differences between these two that are important and that we can experiment with? So based on the paper, there are 5. The first one is they have different idea about neurocorrelative consciousness. So which area of the brain is actually underlying our consciousness itself, rather than simply being a precursor or a consequence of our consciousness. So of course, global workspace theory believe that the global workspace, the prefrontal cortex, is the neurocorrelative consciousness. fine. The IIT believe that the posterior hot zone have the right physical structure to support this cause-effect structure and therefore consciousness. So the posterior area should be the neural correlate of consciousness. Okay, that's pretty good. Another difference is the decoding. So the idea seems to be that the content of our consciousness, we should be able to derive it or extract it by looking at the activity of the neural correlate of itself. So global workspace theory would say that by just looking at the activities in the prefrontal cortex, we should be able to extract information about what we are actually seeing and how we are seeing them. The same applies to IIT, but instead of the frontal or prefrontal cortex, they're talking about the posterior. Okay, move on to the temporal dynamic of neural correlates of consciousness. What does that even mean? Well, you see, in the global workspace here, they talk about ignition, right? We talk about ignition, overcoming this threshold to get into the global workspace. But of course, the name ignition implies that it's a sort of on and off process. Imagine you are starting a car, right? You start the ignition, and then the process sort of sustains itself. Once the information through ignition enters the global workspace, it's just there, right? Unless something requires an update of this global workspace, it will just remain there. You don't need consistent, persistent activity to support this conscious experience. It's already in the workspace. IIT, on the other hand, proposed that you need a sustained activity for the entirety of the duration of your experience. So that's one major difference as well. Another major difference is the pre-stimulus activity. So the idea is that imagine the global workspace. It's already very busy. It's doing a whole bunch of stuff. If that's the case, it will require a higher threshold for other information to go into the workspace. So if before the participants are seeing whatever they are seeing, their prefrontal cortex have shown high activities, we know that they are less likely to see what they are seeing because the information going to have a tougher time getting to the workspace, which is already preoccupied. And the IIT sort of propose quite a different pictures. They're saying that if there are already good activities in the posterior areas, it's already very excitable. You should expect it's easier for information to go in and be processed into consciousness, right? Now that's 3 of the 5 differences. There are 2 more, well, actually 4 of 5 differences. The last one is functional connectivity. So we talked about global workspace being connected to all the higher sensory areas across the brain. So when participants are seeing something, we should expect a synchronized activity in both the prefrontal cortex and whatever other area it's connected to. If it's vision, then maybe higher level, higher order visual areas, you would expect something like that. Or maybe it's category specific, you would expect prefrontal cortex to have a synchronized activity with whatever category specific area they are. For example, fusiform facial area. That's a good example, right? So that's the 5 sort of general differences. Now we'll go into the exact experiment they are trying to conduct. I will need to share the screen for this. There are 2 experiments, actually. We will only be talking about one of them since we don't have enough time. Sure. Yes, great. Can I enlarge this? Yes. So this is the first experiment. The idea of the first experiment is really to show participants a variety of visible stimuli, but they have different relevancy to the task, and see how their brain responds to the stimuli. So we'll go through it quickly. Initially, participants will see something like this. They'll be instructed to press when they see either the faces or the clock. Right, and we can see they are presented with a sequence of different stimuli. Start with faces and male faces, letters, so on and so forth. The duration of the stimuli could be 500, 1000, or 1500 milliseconds. So it's entirely visible for the participants. However, there are some interesting differences, right? We see that these stimuli are from different categories. So we see two different kind of faces, one male, one female. We see letters, we see objects, a clock or a fan or an oven. And even larger categories, we have the face object category as well as the letter and pseudo letter categories. Right? The idea is that there will be stimuli that is a task relevant target. So the participant, when they see it, they should make a response. And there will be stimuli that is task relevant. So they are in the right big category, but they are not the target, like the male faces or the fans or the ovens. And then there will be task irrelevant, like they are from a completely different category. Like in this case, the letter for this task would be entirely irrelevant. And of course, you may have already realized one more intricate detail about this experiment is the orientation of the stimuli. Now, in all the cases, it's irrelevant. The orientation doesn't matter, because the orientation is always both orientations, the head-on and the set way, they are both included in the target. So decision making wise, it's entirely irrelevant. But of course, from the theory of consciousness perspective, we should be able to decode this orientation just by looking at the neural signals. It doesn't matter it's IIT or global workspace, they should both be able to do this, right? So that's the idea. Now, hypothesis and expected results. What should we expect? First, we're talking about decoding. We have sort of already talked about it. But essentially, the idea is that all the content that should be decoded will be decoded if the theory is correct. The differences is, of course, the area of the decoding. Are we talking about the prefrontal area? Are we talking about the posterior hot zone? So that's important. Maybe I can show some kind of, yes. We'll just be looking at experiment 1, right? So for example, global neural workspace theory would say that you'll be able to decode category and orientation in the prefrontal cortex for both the relevant, task relevant and task irrelevant features. If they can't do it, then it's most likely they will either be challenged or they will have a fail state of their hypothesis. So that's one hypothesis. A second major one is the synchrony for the, or rather, it's more like the functional connectivities for each series. The GNWT predicts that prefrontal cortex and the, let's say when we see a face, the fusiform facial area will have high synchrony. The IIT, on the other hand, predicted the early visual area, so maybe primary visual area V1 or V2, would have a strong synchrony with the fusiform facial area. So I guess for GNWT, it's more about a much longer area synchrony, and for IIT, it's much closer, much more localized in the posterior. So that's another major hypothesis for the two. And of course, we have the temporal dynamic. So we talk about ignition, right? But of course, every time you update the global workspace, it requires some kind of spike of activity that represent this ignition. So GNWT predict that on the onset and the offset of the stimuli, they should have some kind of strong activities, while in the middle, it's mostly silent. So we can imagine that if the stimuli duration is much longer, then there should have a much longer period of silence in the middle. While for IIT, doesn't matter, sustained activities throughout. So that's the temporal dynamic. And at the end, we have the NCC, neural correlative consciousness. I'm not entirely sure how they are trying to find it, but the rough impression that I got is that they separate it into 3 stages, right? In the first stages, they compare the baseline to task relevant stimuli. And they are trying to find the area that are sensitive to task relevant stimuli in comparison to baseline. What do I mean by baseline activities? It's just when they are looking at a blank gray screen. In contrast to when they are looking at, let's say, a face, assuming that's task relevant. So that's the first step. The second step is to find a contrast between task relevant stimuli and task irrelevant stimuli. So let's say face object contrast with letters, pseudo letters. And they will use these two as kind of a filter to try to find out exactly what areas are more akin to a consequence of conscious experience rather than the conscious experience itself. So something like cognitive judgment, right? Well, participants need to press button when they see the right stimuli. So some kind of cognitive judgment is involved. But we are not interested in cognitive judgments. We're interested in consciousness itself. So by doing these layer after layer of filtering, we can get some kind of, we can remove those confabulations and just get the NCC itself. So that's the 4 hypotheses. And it turns out the result of this experiment is in an entirely different paper, and it's very long. So we can't get into that either. And that will sort of wrap up the protocol and hypothesis and rationale for the experiment 1. Any questions or opinions?
Yeah, I do have a question regarding the, I think that's the fourth, wait, okay. The fourth difference in the predictions between series, the pre-stimulus activity, that one. And I can understand from the GNW perspective that if it's some pre-stimulus activity, the workspace is already occupied. But I think from the IIT perspective that the prediction is not very clear why. Say it claims that a region is already active, but at the level of neurons, that might not be the case. Yeah. Yeah, I think from the IIT perspective that the reason why higher pre-stimulus activity actually makes it easier to have conscious experience. Yeah, I'm not sure if Mike, you have some ideas or answers to that. Yeah.
I don't really have very good answer to it. I think I'm personally agnostic to whether this is true or not. I'm not entirely sure how it would work from cause-effect structure perspective. unless there are some fundamental changes to the underlying structure of these areas as a result of this excitability. But other than that, I don't really have a good answer.
Yeah, I can. To me, it's reasonable to assume that if we compare between GNW and IIT, yeah, from GNW perspective, it's harder to have conscious experience if the workspace is occupied. That's understandable. Yeah. But without that comparison, the IIT perspective is not that clear. Okay, that's what I think after reading the paper, I mean.
Yeah, certainly. I guess that's one of the reasons why it's not explicitly tested in the experiment one.
Yeah, and
because-
also that difference is not explicitly tested in the experiment. Yeah. Okay. That's my question. That's the question from me. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I want to ask about the temporal dynamic of neural quality of consciousness, because they say that IIT assuming consciousness should persistent over the duration of a consciousness experience. But did they measure or control the attention during the task? And because I haven't go through the whole design part, so that's my question. Did they measure or control the attention during the state?
I don't think they controlled it. I think attention can be measured by some kind of eye tracking they did, if my memory is correct.
Okay.
Uh,
Oh, yes. It's referred. Okay, I see. I think eye tracking is enough. Right.
what's the concern here?
Sorry, by attention, Lipeng, do you mean attention? The attention shifting within the stimulus, or an attention an on or off the stimulus.
Like during the task, I assume that if I need to control the attention or know whether they are fully attended in the task to make a conclusion.
Like whether or not there are some mind wanderings involved.
Yes.
Okay, I see.
But maybe this is a minor point. Very just curious about whether they have control. But eye tracking, I think it is enough to justify that.
Yeah.
Should we sneak peek about the result just to have a look? Because it's not very satisfying talking about protocols and hypotheses. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the protocol is well written itself, yeah. Mostly.
Yep.
It's complicated. I sort of understand, like, it's only after Mike in your presentation talking about orientation that I understand the purpose of it. Because it seems to me a little bit redundant at the start, especially when I was reading it, that, yeah, you're putting it on side view versus front view, but it does not change the decision. But as you said, it changes the conscious, like visual experience of it without changing attention. So that could be used as a way in which you disentangle between well, I should say, if there is a pattern of neural activity that correlates to a certain perception of orientation, then that could be picked up as opposed to just having everything on front view. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
I feel like the experiment 1 is more about the content of the experience, right? And experiment 2 was their invisible stimuli. It seems to be focusing on more, do you see it or do you not see it? That kind of idea.
Yeah.
Shall we
Right.
once
Yeah, let's have a
again,
peek.
let's have a peek. Oh, we're not going into this paper, but this is the summary of the result. So I think the result is
Yeah, it has to be ambiguous. It has to be.
visual sustained response. Tell me the conclusion.
I think it's for
Yes.
IIT. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
Sorry,
Oh,
isn't that part for experiment 2? That's not the results for experiment 1, right?
I don't think the result for experiment 2 has been published.
No.
I think it's ongoing.
Because they put the stimulus in different durations, right? And yeah, I think it's just GW, the global workspace is the one with the on and off, and IIT with the sort of sustained one, yeah. Regardless of the duration. Lack of ignition at offset.
Yeah. I wonder if they are talking about dimension, the orientation here.
But yeah, the
Maybe.
where is the results for decoding? Okay, content.
It should be above. I think it was above. We find information about conscious content. That gives you the location.
Oh yeah, in content specifics. That doesn't look like decodability, right?
I mean, I guess there are limitations, certainly. I'm not familiar with the methods entirely.
Yeah, because from my reading of the protocol, I feel the emphasis is on the decodability and relevant issues. And
Yeah, it's difficult to say here. Is there no clear winner in terms of decodability or neurocorrelative consciousness? Huh? Oh,
Seems like no.
well, maybe a good paper to read next time then. Yeah,
Uh,
so
I'm not
there's
sure how to
only a
think about
summary for full
it.
text?
There
No
is
full
full
text?
text. It's just 28 pages.
Oh, okay, I found
Then,
it. I found it. Yeah.
wait.
so
Prediction,
the
decoding.
results is another.
Sorry.
I mean, yeah, they have a decoding of conscious content. Yeah,
Decoding.
there are results for decoding. Yeah,
Yeah.
in the full text.
Decoding of category. Oh, sorry. One thing I didn't mention is the 3 neural imaging methods that they use, right? fMRI, the simultaneous MAG and EEG, and the intracranial EEG.
Oh yeah.
Do they actually give different results? I mean, obviously, but
Maybe you can do it. We can do it next time. Yeah.
okay, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no,
Because I didn't read the full text, so
I didn't,
and it's
well,
quite
not
long.
interested. Yep. Okay, right. We're coming back to the protocol itself. Any questions? If no, it's okay. I mean, it's kind of thought-provoking, but it's hard to form a solid question.
Since you mentioned, I have a question regarding the equipment. What's the advantage of IEG? What's the difference between why it's called IEG?
Because it's intracranial. In
Oh,
the-
yeah, I
yeah.
see, I see.
Yeah, you know, the epilepsy patients, they put the probe inside.
Yeah, right. It's inner, okay.
Yeah. What I wondered about was why use simultaneous MAC and EEG rather than simultaneous fMRI and EEG. But I guess I'm not an expert either, so maybe there's unique advantage to one of them.
Are these three apparatus or three type of measure provide a different granularity of the data itself?
Different resolution, certainly. I mean, like intracranial, well, actually intracranial is almost like measuring the different thing much deeper into the cortex rather than just on its surface, right?
Yeah.
They're complementary. I guess that's would be my description. I'm actually a little bit uncertain about the sustained activity part regarding the temporal dynamic in IIT. I'm sure there's good reason for it. I mean, they know a lot more about IIT than I do, but I would just wonder whether it's entirely necessary, or is it simply like a practical consideration when the participants are viewing an object in the actual experiment? Because I have heard of at least thought experiment on the idea that even if the network doesn't have any activities, or rather, maybe I'm mistaken. But the idea seems to be that even the two network have same activities, but different organization of the physical substrate. It can still lead to different conscious experience. Then the point is missing. Damn.
I don't think it is necessary in the sense that there could be structures that could afford this type of on, then silence, then on again type of scenario, or even just as the results say, just on and then baseline type of activity, right? Because what they're measuring is the activity itself, the neuronal activity, right? With EEG, IEEG, fMRI, they're measuring neuronal activity without going very detailed into unfolding the whole cause effect structure, most of which will be absence in one snapshot of a activity, right? Because you can't talk about connections when you're looking simply at neurons firing. So I think there could be a possibility where there could be a possibility that it could afford something like this. I think
Yeah,
it may not be necessary. Yeah.
that's my impression as well. The structure is more important than the activity, and didn't really necessarily specify what kind of activity it has to have in any given moment, I guess, for conscious experience.
Mm. I'm sure this is written somewhere in the results if it is a valid point in the results paper.
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of IT people are here and they are saying it's sustained activity, so I assume they have good reasons. But yeah. Any other questions? If not, that's okay. We all can always end it early.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no question, but yeah, I think the result section will be more intriguing because only with the protocol it is we don't have specific question about the protocol. It is very well prepared, I think. But yeah, since we are more interested in the result and seeing which result supporting which support hypothesis, I think the next paper will be more interesting.
Yeah, well, at least with the analysis section, it's quite hard to understand how to analyze the results without actual results. Yeah.
And
Very true.
a question is, as a IT people, Mike, do you happy with their analysis technique? Because in my impression, maybe we need to calculate phi at least at some point. No, no need to do
Nope, no. When we start calculating phi, we are not gonna stop. It's gonna take forever,
that.
genuinely forever.
Okay.
So the idea is not to. This is one of the reasons why the letter IIT concern letter mentioned this, right? They're saying that it didn't test phi at any point in this adversarial collaboration, so it's not a true test. But I do feel like we have already illustrated a very different perspective. It's all operationalized, of course. There's no phi included.
Yes.
But the reason why they have these operationalized hypotheses is because the theory is telling them that the posterior hot zone, for example, just looking at this structure, it should have more phi than other areas.
See. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing the results. Yeah, that's it.
All right. That's great. If that's the case, we shall wrap it up now. Maybe we'll do I probably can't do the entirety of the result paper, maybe half of it, we will see.
Yeah. And thank you, Mike, for the presentation
Yeah.
of this paper. Yeah.
No worries. Thank you for attending. All right. That's the journal club for today, and we will end it there. Hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.